The nursery glowed like a soft, silk-lined fortress against the world. Hand-painted murals of mythical forests climbed the walls, and the scent of expensive lavender hung heavy in the air. Every toy on the floor was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, and every shadow in the room carried a secret. This was not a home so much as a gilded cage for the innocent, and at its center stood the Korean Mafia boss's wife. Immaculate, sharp-edged, untouchable. She moved with the silent, predatory grace of someone who viewed loyalty as a debt and cruelty as a hobby. In the center of the plush rug, a woman knelt in the shadows. She was the simple Nanny, a black woman in a plain, high-collared shirt, her hair pulled into a sleek, professional bun. Eyes lowered, voice steady, presence carefully minimized. She was invisible by design. To the household, she was just Naomi, the woman who wiped tears and tied shoelaces, a shadow drifting through the halls of power. Then came the frame-up, a deliberate movement. A hand reaching into a designer bag. A diamond necklace, worth more than most people earn in a lifetime, was discovered, tucked among the baby wipes and nursery supplies. The wife didn't scream. She smiled. And with that smile, she began to transform a quiet afternoon into a public theater of betrayal. The guards at the door shifted, sensing blood, certain of how this would end. The room believed they were about to witness a lesson in obedience, the crushing of a servant who dared to steal from the altar of power. No one realized they were about to witness a total dismantling. If you're ready for a story about deep-cover deception, a woman with nothing to lose, and the most calculated exposure of a criminal empire you've ever seen, then you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we bring you the stories of hidden power that you won't find anywhere else. Drop a reveal in the comments if you're ready to see the hunter become the prey. And let's get into the story. The silence that followed the wife's discovery was thick, suffocating. Outside the nursery windows, the city the boss owned glittered under a cold moon, oblivious to the storm brewing inside. Eyes turned toward Naomi, not with pity, but with the cold curiosity of those watching a trapped animal. Power was entertainment here, and framing the help was the ultimate spectator sport. Naomi remained perfectly still, her posture straight, her breathing controlled. Her name was Naomi, and while the woman in white silk saw an object that had malfunctioned, the agency saw their most lethal asset. She had spent months as a ghost in this house, paying in silence and disappearing into the background. She had learned long ago that in this world, innocence wasn't a shield, it was a target. "Do you know," the wife said softly, dangling the diamonds like a noose, "the penalty for biting the hand that feeds you?" Naomi's eyes remained lowered, but behind the stoic mask, her mind was already uploading the final gigabytes of evidence to a secure server.
Her voice was calm.
Neutral.
No tremor.
"I'm very sorry you feel that way, ma'am," Naomi replied.
She wasn't apologizing for the theft.
She was apologizing for what she was about to do to their empire. The wife tilted her head, enjoying the moment of perceived victory, unaware that a glowing green tactical earpiece was already buzzing with the signal to strike. The simple Nanny was gone. The agent had arrived. The nursery was a world of soft edges and muted pastels, a sharp contrast to the cold, marble-veined corridors that made up the rest of the mansion. To any observer, Naomi was a fixture of this piece, a woman who moved with a rhythmic, predictable grace, her hands always occupied with the small, domestic tasks of caregiving. She possessed the rare gift of being present without being noticed, a quality that made her the perfect nanny and an even more perfect ghost. She sat on the floor, the thick wool carpet dampening the sound of her movements, as she organized a set of hand-carved wooden blocks. Her focus seemed entirely on the toddler at her side, yet her invisible design was a masterpiece of tactical efficiency. Every time she leaned over to pick up a stray toy, her fingers, disciplined and steady, were doing more than just cleaning. With a flick of her wrist, a microscopic transmitter, no larger than a grain of rice, was pressed into the underside of a mahogany bookshelf. She worked with a controlled breath, Her internal clock synchronized to the patrol rotations of the guards outside the heavy oak doors. She knew exactly how many seconds she had before the shadow of a sentry would pass the frosted glass. In those seconds, she was a blur of professional dominance disguised as a servant's diligence. She tucked a recording device into the base of a high-end baby monitor and replaced a decorative baseboard with a precision that left no trace. Her life was one of extreme contrast. One moment, she was gently humming a lullaby to the boss's youngest son, her voice calm and neutral, possessing no tremor, even as she heard the muffled sounds of a violent interrogation occurring 3 floors below. The next, she was mentally mapping the mansion's security grid, identifying the blind spots in the CCTV that she could exploit when the time for the reckoning arrived. Despite her professional detachment, a flaw was beginning to take root in the quiet moments. As she watched the children sleep, their faces free of the cruelty that defined their parents, Naomi felt a flicker of something forbidden, a protective instinct that went beyond her mission. She saw them not as the heirs to a criminal empire, but as small lives caught in a gilded cage. It was a dangerous attachment for a woman who needed to remain a shadow. She paid for her small, external life in cash and disappeared into her room the moment her shift ended, never leaving a footprint or a lingering scent. In the nursery, she was the simple Nanny, a woman of folded hands and lowered eyes. She was the one who cleaned the spills and whispered the stories. The household viewed her as an object, a reliable machine that kept the children quiet while the adults managed their altar of power. They didn't see the way her gaze lingered on the security keypads, or the way she calculated the trajectory of the guards' weapons. They didn't see the agent waiting behind the stoic mask. They only saw the ghost, unaware that the ghost was the only one in the house who truly knew everything that was happening within its walls. The peace of the nursery was a fragile thing, and outside its double-bolted doors, the atmosphere of the mansion began to curdle. Minhee, the boss's wife, watched the security monitors in her private dressing room, her eyes narrowed as she observed the woman she had come to loathe. She didn't see a caregiver. She saw a threat. It wasn't that Naomi was loud or disruptive. It was the opposite. It was the way Naomi's controlled breath never faltered, the way the children looked to the nanny for comfort instead of their mother, and the way her husband's gaze lingered just a second too long on Naomi's stoic, athletic profile during morning briefings. To Minhee, the nanny's silence wasn't a sign of respect. It was a cloak. She viewed Naomi as a malfunctioning object that refused to break, a shadow that occupied too much space in her husband's world. Jealousy, for a woman like Minhee, was never a private agony. It was a spectator sport that required a victim. She began to spend her afternoons pacing the marble halls, her white silk gowns whispering against the floor like the hiss of a snake. She looked for flaws, a speck of dust on a toy, a minute delay in a meal, but Naomi was flawless. The nanny was a ghost who left no trail, making her even more infuriating to a woman who demanded a target. The resentment reached a boiling point during a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Minhee watched through a cracked door as Naomi sat on the floor, the sunlight catching the sleek, professional low bun of her hair. The children were laughing, a sound that felt like an insult to Minhee's own cold authority. It was then that the plan for a purge took shape. If she couldn't find a flaw in the nanny, she would manufacture one. She wouldn't just fire the woman. She would destroy her, turning her invisible existence into a public scandal that would ensure she never worked in this city again, or lived to see another sunrise. Minhee's predatory smile returned, a gentle expression that signaled a coming reckoning. She began to coordinate with the household staff she had bought with bribes and threats, preparing the theater for Naomi's downfall. She needed a catalyst, something so grand that even her husband's pragmatism couldn't ignore it. She began to eye the family's safe, her mind already moving the pieces of the heist into place. She would frame this simple nanny for the one thing the Mafia boss valued more than his children, his legacy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, bloody shadows across the nursery floor, the trap was set. Naomi remained calm, her hands folded neatly at her waist, unaware that the jealousy of the woman in white silk was about to ignite a fire that would burn the entire household to the ground. The mansion breathed with a different kind of life on the night of the syndicate gala. It was a rhythmic, heavy pulse of filtered power, the air outside the nursery thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the sharp metallic tang of high-end security. Below, the ballroom was a chandeliered altar, where the city's most dangerous men traded secrets over crystal flutes. But upstairs, in the living quarters, a different kind of transaction was taking place, one of calculated destruction. Naomi moved through the evening with her usual controlled breath, her presence carefully minimized as she prepared the children for bed. She was a shadow in the periphery, her hands folded neatly at her waist whenever a guard passed. To the syndicate, she was a non-entity, an appliance in a service uniform. Yet, beneath the professional low bun, her tactical earpiece hummed with the encrypted data of every conversation happening in the gala below. She was closer than ever to the reckoning, her digital net nearly full of the evidence needed to dismantle the boss's world. She didn't hear the wife approach. She sensed her. Minhee didn't enter the nursery so much as she invaded it, her white silk gown luminous in the dim light. She looked like a queen surveying a conquest. She didn't speak to Naomi. She didn't even look at her. Instead, she moved toward the children's beds with a predatory, gentle smile, her fingers grazing the edge of a diamond-encrusted heirloom necklace that hung heavy around her throat. It was the morning star, a piece of jewelry that wasn't just wealth. It was the symbol of the family's lineage, a treasure the boss guarded with a lethal obsession. While Naomi was occupied with the youngest child in the adjacent washroom, Minhee slipped into the nanny's small, austere living space. With the clinical precision of a practiced saboteur, she unclasped the necklace. It felt cold against her palm, a heavy weight of gold and ice. She didn't hide it in a drawer or under a mattress where it might be missed. She tucked it deep into the lining of Naomi's professional charcoal gray travel bag, the one Naomi kept packed for a quick exit. When Naomi returned to the room, Minhee was standing by the window, staring out at the city she believed she owned. The silence was thick and expectant, a theater waiting for its opening act. "The house feels heavy tonight, doesn't it, Naomi?" Minhee said softly, her voice carrying that signature lack of tremor. "It is a busy night, ma'am," Naomi replied, her voice neutral, eyes lowered. She felt the shift in the room's energy, a sudden, sharp spike in the atmospheric pressure. Her training screamed at her that the environment had been compromised, but she remained still, her athletic build poised in a deceptive slouch of submission. Minhee turned, the necklace gone from her neck, replaced by a void that would soon be filled with accusations. She studied Naomi as an object that had malfunctioned, savoring the secret knowledge of the trap she had just set. The heist of hearts was complete. Minhee had planted the seed of a betrayal that no amount of loyalty could survive. As she swept out of the room, her silk train hissing against the floor, she left behind a ticking clock. Naomi stood in the center of the nursery, her hands folded, her mind already beginning to calculate the variables of the coming storm. The simple Nanny was being framed for a crime that carried a death sentence, unaware that her true mission was about to collide with the wife's jealous theater. The gala below had reached its crescendo, the low thrum of music vibrating through the floorboards like a distant heartbeat. In the nursery, the air was suddenly sliced open by a piercing, practiced shriek. Minhee stood in the doorway, her hands clutching at her bare throat, her immaculate white silk gown shimmering under the recessed lights. "It's gone," she gasped, her voice carrying that predatory edge of feigned desperation. "The morning star, it's been taken from my neck." Within seconds, the quiet sanctuary of the nursery was invaded. The heavy oak doors swung wide as the Korean Mafia boss entered, his black tuxedo a dark stain against the pastel walls. Behind him, guards with expressionless faces fanned out, their presence turning the room into a chandeliered altar of judgment. Naomi stood by the child's crib, her hands folded neatly at her waist, her posture straight but non-threatening. She was the picture of invisible obedience, even as the cold weight of the boss's gaze settled on her. "Search everything," the boss commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Minhee pointed a trembling, manicured finger toward Naomi's small living quarters. She was the only one near me. She's been so quiet, so perfect. It's always the ones who hide in the shadows who have the most to conceal. The theater was meticulously choreographed. A guard emerged from Naomi's room moments later, holding her charcoal gray travel bag. With a violent tug, he appended the contents onto the plush rug. Amidst the sensible shoes and folded professional clothes, the morning star tumbled out. The diamonds caught the light, spilling cold, crystalline fire across the floor. The silence that followed was thick and expectant. Guests who had drifted up from the gala lingered in the hallway, sensing the coming blood. Power was entertainment, and they were about to witness a lesson in the cost of betrayal. "Down," the boss whispered. It wasn't a request. Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't cry out or beg for mercy. With a slow, controlled breath, she lowered herself. She sank to her knees in the center of the room, mirroring the very image of the broken servant they expected to see. As she knelt amidst the scattered remnants of her simple life, Minhee stepped forward, her predatory smile widening. She looked down at Naomi not as a woman, but as an object that had malfunctioned, relishing the sight of the nanny forced to the floor. "You thought you were clever, didn't you?" Minhee whispered, leaning in so only Naomi could hear. "You thought you could be a ghost in my house and I wouldn't notice the way you watched us?" Naomi's eyes remained lowered, focused on the diamond necklace resting inches from her knees. To the room, she looked defeated, a simple woman crushed by the weight of her own greed. No one noticed the way her fingers twitched with a rhythmic, disciplined pulse. No one saw the unwavering, stoic gaze that remained fixed and calculating. She was on her knees, yes, but she was not broken. She was waiting for the clock to strike 0. As the boss reached for the heavy silver pistol at his lower back to deliver a lesson in obedience, the atmospheric pressure in the room shifted. The theater of cruelty had reached its peak, and the reckoning was exactly one heartbeat away. The boss stepped into the center of the nursery, the weight of his silver pistol a silent promise of the violence to follow. He looked down at Naomi, who remained motionless on her knees, the morning star diamond necklace glittering like a fallen star between them. "Give me a reason," he whispered, his voice a jagged edge of betrayal. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't end this right here, on the rug where you played with my children." Minhee leaned against the doorframe, her white silk gown draped elegantly around her as she savored the sight of the nanny's supposed ruin. "She has no reason, darling," the wife cooed. "She's just a common thief who thought she was invisible enough to get away with it." The silence in the room was thick, suffocating, the kind of silence that precedes a landslide. Then Naomi took a breath. It wasn't the shallow, fearful gasp of a victim. It was the controlled breath of a predator who had finally finished the hunt. Without being told to move, Naomi stood up. The shift was instantaneous. The non-threatening curve of her shoulders vanished, replaced by the rigid, disciplined line of an elite athlete. Her gaze, once lowered in service, rose to meet the boss's eyes with an unwavering, stoic intensity that made the guards instinctively tighten their grip on their weapons. She didn't look like a nanny caught in a lie. She looked like the commander of the room. "The reason," Naomi said, her voice steady and echoing with a clinical authority, "is that you are currently being recorded on 3 different frequencies, and my extraction team is precisely 4 minutes from your perimeter." A ripple of confusion crossed the boss's face, but before he could speak, Naomi reached a hand to her high collar. With a sharp, practiced motion, she adjusted a small, charcoal gray flap of fabric, revealing the subtle, glowing green pulse of a tactical earpiece. The mask hadn't just dropped, it had been shattered. "Control," she said, speaking directly into the air as if the room itself were listening. "Target is armed. The wife has successfully initiated the jealousy protocol exactly as predicted. Evidence of the Morning Star frame-up is logged and timestamped. Move to Phase 2. Minhee's predatory smile faltered. The theater of cruelty she had built was suddenly being rewritten by the woman she had dismissed as an object. The boss raised his weapon, his knuckles white, but Naomi didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her athletic build poised for a strike that would be far more lethal than anything they had seen in the boxing ring. "You aren't a nanny," the boss hissed, the realization bleeding into his voice like ink in water. "I haven't been a nanny for a single second of the 6 months I've spent in this house," Naomi replied, her voice neutral, possessing no tremor, even as the red laser of a sniper's appeared on the boss's chest, filtering through the nursery window. "I am a senior special agent with the Federal Task Force. And you, sir, are out of time." The power dynamic in the chandeliered altar of the nursery didn't just shift, it inverted. The hunter had become the prey, and as the sirens began to wail in the distance, Naomi didn't look away. She was no longer a shadow drifting through the halls. She was the reckoning they had never seen coming. The sirens wailing in the distance provided a frantic backbeat to the frozen tableau in the nursery. The boss held his weapon with a trembling hand, his world tilting on its axis, while Minhee's face had drained of its predatory color, turning as white as her silk gown. Naomi didn't move to disarm him. She didn't need to. She simply tapped the side of her tactical earpiece, and a crisp, digital chime echoed through the room's high-end surround sound system. "You wanted a performance," Naomi said, her voice dropping into a register of cold, clinical detachment. "So, let's review the tape." The speakers crackled to life, filling the room with the private, hissed whispers of the night before. "The necklace is too obvious, ma'am," a maid's voice pleaded. Then came Minhee's unmistakable, sharp tone. "That's the point. I want her broken. I want her on her knees in front of everyone. Put the Morning Star in her charcoal bag. Make sure the boss finds it himself. I want him to be the one to pull the trigger." The silence that followed the recording was visceral. The boss turned his gaze toward his wife, his eyes reflecting a toxic mixture of shock and burgeoning rage. Minhee stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth, the theater of cruelty she had so carefully directed now collapsing upon her. But Naomi wasn't finished. "The frame-up was the entertainment," she continued, her athletic build poised like a coiled spring. "But this is the evidence." She swiped a small, glass-faced tablet from her pocket, the nanny's scheduling device that was, in reality, a high-level decryption hub. She tapped the screen, and the audio shifted from the domestic to the deadly. The nursery was suddenly filled with the wet, heavy sounds of the docks, the rhythmic thud of a body hitting concrete, followed by the boss's own voice, cold and devoid of mercy. "Dispose of the senator's brother. Make it look like an accident. And the witnesses in the warehouse? Leave no one alive." The recording continued, detailing the clinical execution of 3 separate rivals over the last month, dates, times, and the chilling sound of the boss giving the final order. Each word was a nail in the coffin of the syndicate's empire. The guards in the room, sensing the shift in gravity, began to lower their weapons. They weren't just looking at a nanny anymore. They were looking at the person who had just dismantled their entire future with a few megabytes of data. Naomi watched the boss's face as the realization settled in. He wasn't just losing his reputation, he was losing his life. The invisible woman he had trusted with his children had been a silent witness to every sin he had committed in the dark. Every transaction, every betrayal, every drop of blood, Naomi said, her voice possessing that terrifying lack of tremor. "It's already at the bureau. The digital dead drop was completed the moment I stood up. You aren't just being arrested. You're being erased." The boss looked at the silver pistol in his hand, then back at Naomi's unwavering, stoic gaze. For the first time in his life, the man who owned the city looked small. The power was no longer in the weapon, it was in the evidence. And as the heavy boots of the extraction team began to thud against the marble stairs outside, the digital reckoning reached its final, silent beat. The atmosphere in the nursery fractured into a jagged, panicked chaos. The boss stood paralyzed, the silver pistol in his hand suddenly feeling like a leaden weight as the audio of his own sins echoed against the hand-painted murals. But it was Minhee whose mask truly shattered. The immaculate wife, now exposed as a petty saboteur and a failed mastermind, saw the walls of her gilded cage closing in. The sirens were no longer a distant threat. They were a roar at the doorstep. Desperation is a corrosive thing, and in Minhee, it burned through the last vestiges of maternal instinct. In a blurred motion of white silk and manicured nails, she lunged toward the youngest boy, who sat trembling in his crib. She snatched the child up, her grip tight and uncoordinated, and retreated toward the balcony that overlooked the city's cold, glittering skyline. "Stay back," she shrieked, her voice thin and high, stripped of its former predatory grace. "I won't go to a cell while you play at being a hero, Naomi. Tell your team to stand down, or he goes over the edge." The guards froze, caught between the falling empire of their boss and the immediate horror of the wife's breakdown. The boss himself took a stumbling step forward, his face pale. Minhee put him down. "He's your son." "He's a bargaining chip," she spat, her eyes darting like a trapped animal's. She backed against the wrought iron railing, the wind whipping her sleek updo into a wild, frantic mess.